In today's video, we continue our NHL season preview series in the Atlantic Division. Today, we're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Is this the year? Will they make it past the second round? Can they be a serious cup contender? We'll discuss the Leafs and their expectations coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're continuing on our season preview series today. As we work through the Atlantic Division, looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, of course, if you're new to the series, here's essentially how we set up these videos. So we're going to recap last year, take a look at how things went, take a look at some team and player stats, look at their cap situation. Then we're going to analyze how the team has changed. We're looking at the additions and subtractions and the prospects that we feel could jump in and be, effective and have a big impact on the lineup. Take a look at some bounce back, breakthrough players that could impact this team this year as well. Take a look at the projected lineup, and then I'll give some thoughts on some of the top questions facing the team or expectations moving forward for the season. So first, let's recap last year before we jump into how things have changed and what we should expect this year. So they finished with a record of 50, 21, and 11, 111 points. Second place in the Atlantic, so a real solid regular season. Again, of course, they've been a real good regular season team for several years in a row now. They've made the playoffs 7 consecutive seasons, but unfortunately, they only have one playoff round victory, which came last year when they ousted the Tampa Bay Lightning in a very long, hard-fought series. Unfortunately, they fell short in the next round to the Florida Panthers. Now, looking at their team stats for last year, some of the numbers here are impressive, but they're not all like top of the league. For the most part, they're in the top half or top 10. Goals for, they scored 279 goals, which was 9th highest. They gave up 222, which was the 7th highest, or 7th best, should say. Power play was really good, the second best in the NHL, 26% conversion rate. And the PK was solid as well at 81.9 for 12th best in the NHL. So overall, you don't have to be the absolute best or top 1 or 2. Goes to show you that if you're top 10 in most of these categories, you're going to have a real successful team. Individually, they were led by Mitch Marner, who was their highest scorer with 99 points. William Nylander was next at 87 points. Austin Matthews was at 85 points. And John Tavares hit 80 points. I mean, certainly they're big fours. We've been referring to them for quite a number of years. The highest paid guys on the team lead the way offensively speaking, and they continue to be the team's top scorers here yet again last year. Of course, when we get to the playoffs, we saw a little bit of a different scenario with probably Nylander being the most consistent player, scoring some big goals. Obviously, I think everybody would have liked to have seen a little bit more success, especially in round 2, out of guys like Matthews and Marner. Now, their current salary cap situation isn't pretty, like they've been dealing with for a long time. They've been up against it, and they're not alone here. A lot of the NHL teams are really in a cap crunch. Now, of course, they're already over the cap and in LTIR. They have some contracts like Jake Muzzin and Matt Murray will be on LTIR. So they have a big pool they can spend above the cap. But even with that extra pool above the cap, they're still over it. So there's $2.943 million over their LTIR allotment. So they need to find a way to become cap compliant. Now they can move some contracts around. They can put a few players in the minors. It's probably going to be the case that you're likely going to see them move one contract, like a contract that's over $1 million per season, and the rest of that to get to compliant if they need to, depending on who goes, will likely come with a couple of guys who don't need waivers going down to the minors, or at least temporarily, to make them compliant for opening night. So we'll see. Obviously, everybody's contract is going to play a role in the coach's decision on who's in the opening night lineup, just as much as their strong play as well. So now let's take a look at how this team has changed. Of course, we saw a big change in the front office with Kyle Dubas not coming back, going through a contract negotiation. Originally, it sounded like Dubas might want to step away. Then we knew that he wanted to come back, but by the time he made it known, it was a little bit too late, looking for too much money. Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs going in a different direction and part ways with Kyle Dubas. bring in Brad Treliving, the former GM in Calgary, who had recently resigned not long before that, and comes to a new hockey hotbed in Canada in Toronto. Of course, he's used to the Canadian landscape, so he should be well positioned to handle the pressure that goes with that, although Calgary's a little bit of a different animal than Toronto, that's for sure. But here's how the team has changed on the ice since last season. Of course, the subtractions, these guys are no longer with the club, including some deadline acquisitions like Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen, who played real solid for them down the stretch and into the playoffs while they were in round 1 and 2. Michael Bunting, who was a nice find for the Leafs a few years ago, who had become a UFA out of Arizona, came to Toronto and really elevated his game, become a lot more consistent, regular NHL player, and was a cheap option for them for a number of years, but he kind of priced his way out of Toronto, unfortunately, by having a fair bit of individual success. Alex Kerfoot, who was the last remaining piece as well from the Tyson Barrie trade, who came to the Leafs with Barrie, of course, in that Avalanche Leaf trade a few years ago, which saw Nazem Kadri going the other way. Kerfoot was a UFA that they just could not afford to keep anymore, so he's no longer with the club. Some defensemen like Victor Mete, Justin Hall, and Eric Gustafsson no longer with the club. Zach Aston-Reese, who they had picked up last year as a depth forward, played some fourth line minutes. Wasn't necessarily in every single game, but it was a decent bottom six forward who killed some penalties for them. But again, he wasn't brought back. And Nola Chari, another NHL trade deadline pickup by Kyle Dubas last year, ended up leaving. Of course, Dubas was fond of Chari and brought him into Pittsburgh, where they're both now working. Now, of course, the addition. So here's the players that Treliving has brought in to replace these guys. And I think for the most part, they've done a pretty good job. Of course, they signed Max Domi as a free agent. They signed Tyler Bertuzzi. So clearly, out of your, if you're looking at your top 9, you're losing O'Reilly, Bunting, Kerfoot, but then you bring in Domi, Bertuzzi. That's pretty good. I mean, Domi and Bertuzzi are both players that certainly have ties to the area. Domi, of course, was a long-time Leaf fan growing up with his father, Ty Domi, being a Leaf legend. Bertuzzi, of course, didn't grow up right in Toronto, but not far from the area as well. Took a 1-year deal to bet on himself. I don't know if Bertuzzi can stay too long-term in Toronto. It's really going to boil down to what he'll accept for a contract. Domi, I think, is more likely out of the bunch to take a bit of a discount and re-up to sign and stay. But Domi and Bertuzzi were the big names that they brought in for more of an offensive role. They should be able to play, hopefully, in the top 6 as well. Kind of round out, you get your Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, and then now you get Domi and Bertuzzi to kind of round things out. Of course, Matthew Nyes will play a role in there too. Hard to say exactly how they structure their lines, but we'll get into that here shortly. Ryan Reeves is another guy who was brought in. I don't mind the addition of Ryan Reeves. However, I do kind of wonder about the overpayment here. I think they might have given him too much term and too much money. I mean, yes, Reeves is intimidating. He's the league's best fighter. I think that there's no doubt about that. I'm not overly convinced, though, that it's really going to deter other teams from really doing anything too much. So to be completely honest, because Reeves doesn't play a lot, and he's not very quick out there. And, he's intimidating. If he gets a hold of you, you're in trouble, but that's half the battle. So I don't know. I mean, I like the addition. I'm not against them bringing in Reeves. I just don't know that they needed to spend as much term and money-wise as they did to acquire his services. They also brought in Dylan Gambrell, who was a UFA that wasn't wanted anymore in Ottawa. Gambrell can either be a fourth-line center or an extra forward for them. They signed John Klingberg to help the back end, which really, to me, is okay. I don't mind Klingberg at all, but he's not really the type of defenseman that they needed. They need somebody back there with a little bit more grit and snarl. They lost out what they had in Luke Shen. McCabe can provide some of that, but really, the Leaf blue line, to me, defensively and the toughness aspect is really what they should have went after. I like Klingberg. I think he'll help. Again, I don't know that he brings what they're looking for, so I don't mind the addition. That's what I'd like to have seen some other moves as well. And, of course, I bring in Martin Jones as a potential for a number 3 goalie. He's going to need waivers. A lot of teams have pretty decent number 3 goalies around the league. There's going to be a lot of goalies hitting the waiver wire right before training camp hits. And, it's possible that there's going to be a lot of guys available, so some of these teams are going to sneak guys through, and that's what the Leafs are hoping for here. They can get him to the Marlies, and he's just an insurance piece, really. Joseph Woll and Sammy will be your goalies at the NHL level. Now, they also brought in Noah Gregor, former San Jose Shark, on a professional tryout as well. There is a potential opportunity there, but we'll see how Gregor does with the Leafs. As far as prospects go that could jump into the lineup this year and have more of an impact, well, between the pipes, Joseph Woll theoretically will be, I believe, still classified as a rookie. He's going to get his first full season. Of course, last year, by the end of the year, he was there full time. But with Murray starting the year in LTIR, I expect we're going to see Samsonov Woll as a full-time tandem, so be his first full campaign. Hopefully, Nick Robertson can contribute. I mean, the guy's been having a lot of injuries the last few years, so we'll see what happens with him. Matthew Knies, though, was very impressive in the limited action he saw at the end of last year. Looks like he had a pretty good offseason. I suspect Knies will be in the opening night lineup and be a fairly regular fixture in the Leafs lineup. I mean, obviously, if he has rookie struggles, maybe that changes, but there's certainly a lot of reasons to think he'll be a regular and be able to succeed. As far as some players that you classify as like bounce back and breakthrough players, well, on a bounce back player, I'm going to go with John Klingberg, because to be honest, the last couple of years haven't been great for him. Like 2 years ago, he was a UFA coming out of the Dallas Stars. I mean, I think he ideally wanted to stay. It was rumored that he turned down an extension in Dallas, like a 7-year deal, worth somewhere around that $7 million per year range. I mean, and then look what happened. He ended up going to UFA, didn't re-sign, stayed as their own rental, and he couldn't get a long-term deal anywhere that was going to be anywhere near the money he wanted. Accepted a 1-year deal with the Ducks. I mean, the money was good that the Anaheim paid him last year, but he couldn't get that kind of money on a longer term. He does a 1-year deal, bets on himself. Obviously had an okay season, got traded, but like the numbers weren't awesome. And then, this year again, gets a short deal out of the Leafs. Now, I think he can bounce back, though, and be closer to what he was 2 to 3 seasons ago with the Dallas Stars, because when he's on the ice, he's going to be feeding the puck to a lot more higher octane offense than he was used to in the past couple of years. So realistically, he should be able to pump up his numbers and get a lot more assists just because of the players that he's going to be passing to. That does play a role. He'll be there as well. Probably get some power play 2 time. So he should get a little bit of PP time. If Morgan Riley, for whatever reason, is injured, that'll increase his opportunity for the offensive zone starts in the power play time. And he's capable of helping in that regard. So I really think the idea that Klingberg could bounce back here, just like we saw Bertuzzi, like some of these short-term deals, this is a great team to do it with if you're going to bet on yourself and try to boost your value, because you're playing with a lot of high-end talent. Now, you can say what you want about the Leafs playoff blunders and what have you. I know there's obviously some Leaf lovers and there's some Leaf haters out there. All that aside, you don't even need to think about that for a second. Say what you want. You cannot deny that this Leaf team has been an extremely powerful offensive machine for a number of years now. So if you wanted to bet on yourself for a year and join a team that had an open spot that you might have to take a cheap contract with to boost your value, this is a great example of how you could do that. So guys like Domi, Bertuzzi, Klingberg, do they have long futures with the Leafs? I don't know. It's possible. I can't see them all sticking around too long, because if they do well, they're going to want more money, and the Leafs just won't be able to afford to give it to them. But the Leafs won't care, because they only have short-term plans here. Now, as far as a breakthrough player goes, like I said, they're young guys like Knies and Woll. I think are going to have some big breakthrough seasons. Joseph Woll, to me, is a guy who's probably going to end up playing probably a little more than people might realize. I can see him playing at least 25, if not 30 plus games, and he has done well when he's been called upon. I think Matthew Knies is poised to have a solid full rookie campaign this year as well, and he may not be as big as some people think. It really boils down to where they put him. If he ends up playing more time on like the third line, he'll still be noticeable, he'll still be effective, and still have a good season, I think, but he won't get as many points. It's just that simple. So Knies and Woll, certainly your players to watch when it comes to prospects having an impact on this lineup. There's no doubt about that. Now let's take a look, courtesy of dailyfaceoff.com, what this projected new lineup going into the upcoming season will look like here for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right now, they're projecting the top 6 to be Matthews, Marner, and Bertuzzi as line 1, Tavares, Nylander, and Domi as line 2. Those are some pretty good lines. David Kampf with Järnkrok and Nyes as your third line, with Reeves and Lafferty flanking Dylan Gambrell as your fourth line center. So the fourth line with Lafferty and Gambrell, there's going to be lots of speed. Reeves doesn't skate the greatest. He's a little bit on the slower side, but he gives you the physical play. Obviously the fighting, the big hits, what have you, whereas Gambrell and Lafferty are tons of speed. David Kampf from one of the better two-way players on this lineup, especially. Järnkrok might be a player where they have to find a way to shed some salary. Järnkrok could be a guy. I know I've seen some Leaf fans have a hard time with that, talking about how well he did last year, and I get that. But you got to remember, that's a byproduct of playing a lot with Matthews and the top big guns here on the offensive side of things. You could put a lot of different players there, and they would have that kind of effect. I really think either Bertuzzi, Domi, Nyes, they can all have that same effect up there, and they're going to, especially in the case of Nyes, make less money. Järnkrok's contract is very movable, and for shedding some money, it does make some sense that he might be the odd man out, but we'll have to see how Toronto and Brad Treliving decides to address this. Their decor will shape up like Riley and Brody, McCabe and Klingberg, Giordano and Liljegren, with Connor Timmins likely playing the role of your number 7D. Samsonov and Wall, of course, makes up your goaltending tandem. So what are the main questions facing this team going into this season? Well, for starters is, are we going to get another solid regular season? We have Sheldon Keefe back behind the bench with an extension. Is the William Nylander contract, I don't know what you want to call it, lack of extension in place, holdout, what have you, is that going to be a distraction? I really think it has that potential to be. Based on everything we've heard about Nylander, it sounds like he's in absolutely no hurry to extend. I think he'd be quite content to see how the season goes, especially his argument is going to be that he's just as important as Matthews and Marner. And really look at last year's numbers. He had more points than Matthews, just as many goals. If he does that again, he's just creating a better argument for himself to get more money, which is going to be that much tougher for him to stay in Toronto because the Leafs just can't afford to have another player making $12-13 million. Now, it's been reported that he wants around 10 or so, and even that seems to be a little bit rich for the Leafs. Otherwise, you think something would be done. But we know that Louis Gross, his agent, is notorious for playing hardball. They will let this drag out as long as they can. William Nylander is laid back, ready to wait, and is in no hurry whatsoever. And my concern is that it becomes a distraction for the team throughout the year, because I think it's going to fair to say over time they're going to get more and more questions about it, and it could have that effect. So you got to hope that it doesn't, but that potential's there. It really is. Another big question for me is, can this bottom 6 give you enough offense? If you look at Gambrell, Lafferty, Reeves, Järnkrok, Kampf, and Nyes, assuming that's your bottom 6, I have some concerns. I mean, Nyes is a good player, but I think he's going to need to be around more offensive players, whether it be Matthews, Marner, or Tavares, Nylander. He's going to have to play on one of those top 2 lines, I think, to be more of an offensive contributor, or his numbers are going to suffer because of it. David Kampf, good player. You don't get much offense. Gambrell barely ever scores. Good skater, okay defensively, but he never produces offense. Never. Sam Lafferty, at times he can be offensive, good skater, on a penalty kill. Reeves, again, you don't get a lot of offense. So the supporting cast, I mean, yes, they have a terrific top 6. They have some big-time offensive weapons, but they need to be able to have secondary scoring. And I honestly have some legit concerns over that ability for these third and fourth lines the way they're currently structured. So can those lines produce enough offense? That's a big question for me. Another one is the goaltending. How are they going to split the games? Is Samsonov good enough to play 50 games? I mean, he had a good first season in Toronto, but, is he top 10 in the league? No. Can he steal some games for you now and then? Sure, he can. But, you just got to wonder, can they stay healthy? What's the case of Matt Murray? If Murray gets healthy through the year, that causes a big, big issue. So goaltending to me, it's not a major concern. It's just more of a question for me is, how do they split up the responsibility and the number of games they each play? And how does that all work out? And, of course, the other big question is the defense. Is the defense good enough? I don't think the blue line that they're going to start the season with is going to be the blue line they go into the playoffs with. It can't be, to be honest. They don't have that physicality and that snarl and grit that it needs to be successful. I mean, ultimately, they knew that going into last year, which is why they added what they did. And look what happened. They won a round for the first time. 7 years in the playoffs, finally win a round. For them to do it again, they're going to have to add similar type players at the deadline. And I think they already know this. Now, Brad Treliving typically has a history here of building from the blue line out. I honestly wonder if he may not wait for the deadline, if it's something that he'll be working on from the get-go here and see if he can't make improvements on that blue line early on. I mean, at some point, essentially, they just need another defender back there who can, preferably on the left side, who can give them some snarl and grit. And to be honest, Giordano could become more of a, I don't want to call him like an extra, but like not an everyday player. I think Giordano would be better served to not play every night. Be more, depending on the team and opponent they're up against, it could be better suited for some teams than others. I think that would be the better way to go myself when it comes to Gio. We'll see. And obviously you got Liljegren, you get Timmins, Brody can play both sides, Klingberg. I think they need help on the back end, and I just don't know exactly how they go about getting it though. Obviously this team is something that's already mortgaged a lot for the future. Is Nick Robertson going to end up playing this year? Because look at that lineup. We don't even have a spot for Robertson right now. Not that things couldn't change. They could. But I do wonder if Robertson becomes a trade piece and maybe he's what helps them bring in another defender. Maybe they get a combination of a gritty defender and some sort of either a pick or a prospect or something else for the future. I don't know. Personally, I think the Leafs will definitely be in the top 3 in their division again. I have no doubt about that. They will be a playoff team. But again, depending on what changes they make, I'm having a hard time visiting them going deep in the playoffs without knowing the moves that they're going to end up making later, because they're going to definitely need some help, in my opinion, if they want to be serious cup contenders and have a legit chance. But this is going to be a great regular season team. I can see them finishing either first or second in the division. Top 2, I think, is probably fair. They probably would love to have the division crown so they can play a wild card team, and then we'll see where things go come playoff time. If they can maybe win multiple rounds this year, can they continue building off that? That's the big goal, and if they can march closer to a Stanley Cup. So let me know your thoughts on the upcoming season here for the Leafs down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.